Since that parting at the start from our safest home and anchor, we yearn for belonging. Soon human touch defines our new sense of intimacy, becoming a good exchange for our first sanctuary. Familiar, though not the same, it soothes and inspires us to begin our necessary launch to living. Holding fast at first, then tentative, to our new shores of connection, we begin our dance of cleaving to, yet holding from those like us, who are also seeking their own delicate balance to life. With every fiber of our spirit, we struggle to become able to be alone, yet also part of those who help us know our emerging selves. They mostly look like us, sound like us, and we become like them. We are so satisfied with this till the day that new presence shows up, and we start to feel the pull to be with this new discovered pleasure. Though different, we bask in it. We flirt with it, it makes us laugh, feel good, reluctant to leave. Call it neighbor, friend, teacher, or just community. Now such a needed part of happy. So our lifelong collecting of others begins. More and more to choose from, to add to our anchoring, our tending of self, and our expanded self called we. Yes, we sense the difference from those first ones, the ones we once needed so much, called family. Once taken for granted, now we fear the risk of losing either one or the other. So we learn this ritual, this flirtatious dance of catching spirits, collecting people, adding them over and over to our we. And we grow better and better at this graceful effort. The new ones pull us, push, shape us, helping define us. This scares us, but also propels us, helping to anchor us, find our center, test our bonds of connection, belonging. We lose some along the way, yet we continue the dance, ever searching and collecting the ones for our we. Some stay, some leave, some melt into us. Absent-minded, automatic, like breathing sometimes, but also intentional, like a patient weaver. We hold the common thread while adding color, pattern to loop together in making our unique design for life. Oh, but we are not always careful to make sure that the design and structure can tolerate contrast, resistance, unexpected and compelling sweet distractions. For these in the end, make our life more fulfilling, satisfying, and worth the living. Welcome.
Thank you so much. What a beautiful way to start. What a really beautiful way to start, Carol. This is Carol Beeble. Am I saying your last name right? Beeble. Who is a member of the National Advisory Board. And I'm Viola Hartwell Mendez, I am chair of the local steering committee here at Emory, and also professor in Spanish and director of engaged learning at Emory University. And I have the great pleasure of introducing to you our provost, Emory's provost, and executive vice president for academic affairs, Claire Stirk. Claire, and I say Claire because I have responded to her invitation to say Claire, and I appreciate that. Claire has actually been provost since February 2013, so she's fairly new in the position. And before that, she was in the Rollins School of Public Health and has had a number of administrative positions, which in the interest of being brief here, I'm not going to go through that whole list, but it's an impressive list. But one of the things that she has been really interested in as provost and before she became provost is the liberal arts, and she's been quite a champion of the Commission on the Liberal Arts at Emory. And it's a commission that has just finished its work and turned in a report, and now there's actually some implementation, and she's been very supportive of the implementation, so I'm sure we'll hear a little bit about that. I am just delighted that she's here. I will say that Emory has a board of directors that decided to meet right now, and so she will actually not be able to stay around because she's got to go and be with Ben as well. But I'm delighted that she's able to spend a little bit of time with us this morning. So welcome, Claire.
Thank you for that introduction. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Good. Some energy in the room. It's really a great privilege to be here and to welcome you to Atlanta, I should say. We have Emory on the brain today. To invite you to Atlanta and to welcome you on behalf of Emory University. Frankly, and I'm biased obviously, I can't think of a better place to hold the Imagining America Conference and have participants come together to contemplate how to use narrative, how to use art to impact and inform American campuses in very thoughtful ways. And I might have just run through that rather quickly, but it's extremely important. Art leads us to truth. It leads us to truths that sometimes we cannot access in other ways. It inspires us, teaches us, binds us together, sometimes temporarily tears us apart, and then we come back together. And as the co-directors Tim Eatman and Scott Peters acknowledged in the conference program, story is a powerful conduit to a way of knowing and learning. You can probably already tell that I'm quite a fan of storytelling, of narratives, of expressing us in different ways than we normally do, and through that way coming together. So if you indulge me, let me indulge myself for a second. I would like to tell you two stories. And I have an immediate disclaimer, which is that the stories are not my stories. They're stories about other people. The first story is about Natasha Threadaway. She is the Robert Rupert Professor of English and Creative Writing at Emory, and she has served 2 terms as Poet Laureate of the United States. It is the story of a child born to a black mother and a white father in 1960s in Mississippi. It takes place during an era when her parents' marriage was illegal in that state. Juxtaposed against her deeply personal experience, Natasha shares these of a soldier in the Native Guard, the first African-American Union troop in the Civil War. The soldier was charged with guarding white Confederate captives. Natasha's stories entered its public life as a book-length poem, and it's now being staged at the Atlanta Alliance Theater through music, image, and text. Both versions of the story allow the storyteller to reclaim her mother's memory after a tragic death and to reclaim the voices of black soldiers whose service has been lost in our collective memory. That's one story I'd like you to think about. The second story comes from a recent graduate from Emory. His name is Jake Karkowski. During his studies, Jake wrote an honors thesis that went on to develop as a one-man show, Yankel on the Moon. His thesis was a play that he wrote. The subject involved catastrophic tragedy. He did so by the Holocaust. The risk he took and the courage that he had is that he developed the subject matter as a play that was a comedy. And typically we don't think about expression of anything having to do with the Holocaust in the context of a comedy. At the premiere of his work, he performed a solo piece while his grandfather was sitting in the audience. His grandfather was a Holocaust survivor. He watched in the audience, and JSR2 will be hosted at the Alliance Theater this spring. So you can see how sometimes we think about one form of expression, story, and then it finds different ways, and how we also use those forms of expression to tell things that otherwise might be difficult to talk about or difficult to connect around. I share these stories for several reasons. One is to tap into our collective experience. It allows us to share deeply personal and important truth through art, through creative expression. Another reason is to know that you at this conference are with friends, with people who all value stories as a means of public discourse. The stories are tangible examples of the value that Emory places on art as a way of teaching, learning, and impacting our lives. We have lots of ways of expressing and valuing art on campus. You probably won't make it from here to the Emory campus, partly because public transportation in the Atlanta area, if you haven't experienced it yet, is somewhat underdeveloped. On campus, we have the Carlos Museum of Art, where it brings the campus and the community together. It's the place where you walk by, you see lots of yellow school buses, and kids from all over the Atlanta area that get to go to a museum, that get to be on a campus, and that get to learn in ways that are otherwise probably not available to them. The university also brings, I have reading glasses that are slipping away, so the university also brings students, faculty, and staff together at the Schwartz Center for the Arts, another wonderful place that we have. If I may just focus on one of our creative departments, the Department of Creative Faculty. The faculty there do all the scholarly things that faculty members are expected to do. They publish, they have all sorts of scholarly products, and I'm quite proud to share with you that as a campus, we've moved away from just sort of thinking of the traditional outcomes, the traditional products, if you wish, that faculty produce, but there is a lot of appreciation for creative ways of sharing your scholarship. We also don't just want to focus on garnering recognition. If you look at faculty in other departments, such as music, dance, theater, the visual arts, and many others, one of the threads that goes through all of those is a deep engagement, an expectation of deep engagement of the students in artistic expression. And I think some of this goes to a comment that you heard earlier about the Commission of the Liberal Arts, where those are dimensions that we really want to help highlight. They're helping Emory students to become steeped as critical thinkers who will go into the world becoming lifelong learners. So it's about now, but it's also about the future. They're allowing our students to develop in storytellers. And when you read the media nowadays, you might see that there's a lot of attention, particularly in political circles. What are students learning when they go to college? And we don't think about issues that students are learning to tell stories. And I know you're an easy audience because I don't have to convince you that teaching people to tell stories is incredibly valuable and powerful. They help us weave the we together, as we already discovered, and that's probably why you're at this meeting. I want to talk a little bit about the we at this meeting and recognize some collaborators who have helped make this happen. Particularly Kennesaw State University, Auburn University, Alternate Roots, the National Center for Civil and Human Rights. And the risk of giving a list is that you might forget somebody. So I apologize if there are people and groups I should have recognized that I have not recognized. Let me stop talking because you have much more important business to do, but please accept my welcome from all of us to you, to be here together, to be in Atlanta. I wish you a conference filled with discovery of new truth, meaningful reflection that leads to action, and good stories. So thank you and have a wonderful conference.
Thank you, Provost Stirk. Thank you. I understand. Thanks to Biala, and thank you, Carol, for setting a tone that we hoped would be set this morning. My name is Kevin Bott. I'm the Associate Director here at Imagining America, and it is a great privilege and honor to welcome you to IA's 14th Annual National Conference, Organizing Culture Change. So thank you for being here. I began at Imagining America in 2006 as a Page Fellow, a publicly active graduate education fellow. And I've said this before, but I really have, if there were such a thing anymore, become a company man for the organization. I was invited during my doctoral studies to, while I was writing, to both co-direct with Adam Bush from USC and Amanda Gilvin from Cornell University to take the reins of the Page program from Sylvia Gale, who founded it in 2003. And then I happened to be in the right place at the right time in my work and finished my dissertation just as the call went out for a new associate director. And so I really feel incredibly blessed to have been able to stay with an organization within higher education that I feel very, very proud to be a part of. In 2006, Julie Ellison, the founding director, was still at the helm. She stepped down a year later, and I had the pleasure then to work for a mentor and friend as the new director, Jan Cohen-Cruz. And 2 years ago, I received, it's always nervous when you get a new boss, as we all know. And when you get two bosses, it's really quite nerve-wracking. But I was really lucky to have been, again, blessed with two. They would hate if I said bosses, because we just don't use that language in our office, but colleagues, mentors, and friends, Tim Eatman and Scott Peters, who are now our faculty co-directors. All I want to say is that when Scott and Tim took the reins of the organization and we began discussing where we were as an organization, who we were as an organization, they both latched on to a conversation that had been bubbling up in the conversations at the National Advisory Board level. And it was a question of how do you move from building an organization to building a movement. And we quickly began as a staff reading Ella Baker and looking at the civil rights movement and thinking about the culture of higher education and what's missing from it in the form of deep public relationships and people who are looking to identify leaders and elevate them into positions of power and influence. So with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce the two people who will begin our conversation this weekend, my colleagues, Dr. Scott Peters and Tim Eatman.
Kevin Bott, ladies and gentlemen. He's the boss. He's the boss. Jamie's the boss. Jamie's the boss. Sure. We are so delighted to be here today and to look out on this august body. My heart always races a bit at this time. Part of it is nerves, but the other part is that there's always such a sense of expectation. Several of the colleagues around the nation who have come up to me already and just said, the spirit is right here at IA. And that really feels good. It really feels that as we have tried to move from the work of our founding director, Julie Ellison, who's sitting right here in the front row, to the work of Jan Cohen-Cruz, the leadership of who is over here to the right. I'm going to ask her to go. That we we've been able to sustain at least an ethos that dominates. I have to tell you, we wonder sometimes whether the fact that the two of us were selected and the previous directors were single, but one person, women, has implications about it. I'm just saying, right? Capacity of that, but we're trying our best. We really appreciate and feel a special privilege to, at this opportunity, have as Kevin said, the responsibility to provide some leadership for this great organization in higher education. Organizing and disruption in higher education. That's the name of this plenary. Organizing and disruption in higher education. Will you say that with me? Organizing and disruption in higher education. I don't know about you, but when we as a staff agreed that we were going to go with that as a title for the plenary, it was a little bit challenging, right? I always know when I feel a little uncomfortable because I'm pressing my toes down to the ground. Right? I'm like, hey, disruption, right? There's some pretty high-level scholars who are going to be in the room, right? Who are leery of that kind of language. At the same time, there are practitioners and publicly engaged scholars that will celebrate that language. But I'm saying that because I want to emphasize or re-emphasize that we are a Big Ten and that we want to provide a space, create spaces for the kind of critical discourse that will enable people to have several entry points into the conversation. And that's an important thing that we want to share. Another important thing that we want to share is that when you think about it, Imagining America is really a disruption in higher education. Right? It's a little difficult to go into history when you're looking out on the front row and seeing people who were part of the creation of it, but you can fact check. Scobie's here, Sanchez, Harry Boyd, all the folks are here. But we know that it was a disruption when William Clinton issued the executive order for the White House Millennium Council that Imagining America was the only higher education project, a part of that effort. And we know that the Millennium Council was designed to look back on the 20th century and look forward to the 21st century. I think a time capsule was part of the Millennium Council, other projects, but under the leadership of Julie Ellison and 19 higher education presidents, I think led by Lee Bollinger at Michigan, there was an insistence that the power of the cultural disciplines should be affirmed within higher education as we went forward into the 21st century. That in a neoliberal technocratic environment, we would insist on the power of the cultural disciplines for knowledge making. And that was a disruption. The first year was an agreement of sharing demonstration projects about how the presidents, the institutions that the presidents represented actually demonstrated that work. And we know that it evolved into the establishment of Imagining America at the University of Michigan, its first headquarters. I'm recounting some of the history because I know there's some new people here. And I think it's useful as we have traveled and had the opportunity to engage individuals. People want to know what the story of IA is. And so we share just tidbits as a springboard into a larger conversation. I had the blessing to catch on with Imagining America as a postdoctoral scholar at the Center for the Study of Higher and Post-Secondary Ed at the University of Michigan, when I engaged with Julie Ellison, and she talked about the need to weigh in on institutional policy so that we could codify the kinds of diverse scholarly artifacts that our provost pointed to a bit ago. And it was my great pleasure to be invited to transition with the consortium. The model of our consortium is that the headquarters is itinerant, and even now, we prepare for another transition after a 2-year term. I'm sorry, after 2 terms and a 10-year term. Yeah, and a 10-year term, he's my fact checker. So we've had 2 cycles at Syracuse, and we'll be transitioning in 2017. I'll just quickly say that it was my great privilege to be in the position to come into the co-directorship with Scott, and I know that he's going to say a little bit about where we've been thinking in terms of our strategic planning for it.
So we're beginning this as a conversation, and we'll be inviting other folks up to join that conversation with us, because we feel like where we are right now, and Carol really helped us to understand this deeply at an institute we held here this past June. Where we are now is there's a new we emerging in Imagine America. Our story is shifting and changing, and we need to be in conversation with each other to understand that shift. We've been drawing from Marshall Ganz's public narrative framework, which has 3 parts: the story of self, the story of us, and the story of now. In the office in Syracuse, we've been spending a lot of time in conversation about the story of self as we get to know each other. And what a remarkable group of people I have the privilege to work with, including this wonderful man right here. I want to acknowledge publicly here. So we've been very consciously understanding that the story of higher education in the United States and around the world, the story of what's happening in Imagine America as it is caught up in that larger story, is shifting and changing, so that we needed to figure out how can we create a space for everybody to contribute to this conversation of who is the we that we are here, and what are we called to do. The story of now, as Marshall Ganz lays it out in his framework, is the story of is about the compelling, urgent things that are happening in the world that call us to act. But how are we to act? What specifically can we do in Imagine America to respond to the challenges that we face, the urgent challenges that we face, not just in higher education, but in our society? We can't answer that question without a really clear sense of who we are in Imagine America. So our journey together as co-directors began with a very significant challenge, a sobering challenge. And for somebody, I taught courses on community organizing at Cornell University for 10 years. I taught courses on narrative inquiry and analysis. So I'm a historian of higher education. I do narrative inquiry work. But it's one thing to teach courses on those things, and it's another thing to be placed in this situation with this phenomenal organization, which is compelled to act. We are different from many other organizations, more on the ground, more nimble, I think, in many ways. It's much more challenging to be in that situation. And that's something that we have to do collaboratively. So I think the co-director model that we weren't invited to be a part of originally, but were ultimately invited to be part of, represents that important reality that we need to do this together. So the challenge when we came in, as Kevin alluded to, was to transition, help Imagine America transition. This came from the National Advisory Board. From a period of its existence where we were building an organization, a new organization, a unique, distinctive organization in higher education, to a place where we're much more consciously thinking about how do we build a movement. We exist because there is a movement. How do we build a movement? What specifically can and should we do to contribute to that work? From the distinctive place of being grounded in the cultural disciplines, arts, humanities, and design. And so the word that represents what we have come to understand our work to be is organizing. And I don't take that word lightly. And my mentor and friend Harry Boyd, who's sitting right over there, has taught me a great deal about this. I don't know if Maria Avila is in the room or not. Maria, are you here? Yeah. She's not here yet, but she will be here. Maria has been a great, great mentor with me, but very challenging, as we all know, on the staff, because we've employed Maria to help us to think about what it means to do organizing and to be an organizer in higher education. And what it means is we've got to change the culture of higher education, and it comes back to changing our own patterns of work. So we've been exploring these things together, and I'll tell you, it has been exhilarating on so many levels. We had a breakthrough moment in June when we had an institute here at Emory exploring how we might draw from models, from practices and ideas from cultural organizing, and different practices and ideas from broad-based organizing traditions like the ones that come from the Industrial Areas Foundation. It's been exhilarating to experiment with that, and we've had great breakthroughs. But I guess I'll be the sober one, the more sober one, although I'm exhilarated too, to say that when we think about the culture of higher education and our own patterns of work, we come back to places that are challenging. And we think about, both of us have been flying around the country, visiting campuses quite a lot these past couple of years. Him a lot more than me, but quite a lot. There's a hamster wheel of activity. This is part of the culture of higher education. We're on these hamster wheels of activity that prevent us from going deep. We are also, and Maria and I have spent a great deal of time talking together about this, and we co-authored a book chapter in a book that's coming out soon about this. We are also fundamentally out of relationship with people outside of higher education. But even more than that, we're fundamentally out of relationship with each other in higher education. That this is part of the culture that we need to figure out how to change. So as we've been traveling around the country, I think as we've shared stories from our experiences, we have just been incredibly inspired by the work we see happening. And as Kevin alluded to, we have come to develop a theory of change that is very much drawn from Ella Baker's work with SNCC, which has to do with the work of finding leaders, finding the people who are already doing the work, helping make that work visible, supporting those leaders, helping them develop power, and doing this throughout the consortium. So we've been inspired deeply by that work. But we've also been sobered because we see against these hamster wheels of activity and the relationship problems, what we're up against to be able to really be effective and go deep. We only had one chance to do, apart from the conference here, a travel together. We went down to New Orleans for the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Free Southern Theater, which was a remarkable moment. And a few things about that trip, we keep coming back to that trip and thinking about it, partly because a man named Glenn Beck is featured in that trip. But we started that.
How many saw the Glenn Beck feature? Oh no.
People didn't see it. Well, we won't go into that too much. But what's it? Okay. So we began with a very powerful visit to Carol's group of students in College Unbound that was very moving and powerful, and gave us a sense of a new generation and of things that really break out of the culture of higher education. And in the middle of that, we got a text message that Glenn Beck had just ranted about Imagine America. We were destroying the country as representative of the anti-American, actually.
Several of our board members were featured on his board of shame. Where's Bruce Burgett?
But only one staff made it to the board of shame, and that was, of course, Kevin Bach.
You make the
And then we were together at the celebration of the founding of the Free Southern Theater. There was something about the generations that really emerged from it. So, but out of all of this, we have come to a place of posing a couple of challenging questions. And Holly, can you put those questions up on the... So these are the questions that we've come to, that we wanted to bring to this floor today for this conversation. So you can see them here. What aspects of the culture of higher education should we strive to change over the next 3 years? How can we deploy ways of knowing from our humanities and design to make sustainable changes in the culture of academic institutions? And then because we have been drawing so much from organizing and because power is so central to being able to do anything in the world, that is the root meaning of power, to be able to. What specific sources and forms of power can we build in IA over the next 3 years to make a difference in the work of organizing culture change? So we would like to invite.
We thought we would be remiss to just have the two of us at dialogue about this. So we've invited several leaders within higher education and within IA to come and to enter into a conversation with us that we hope will expand to the larger body. I want to ask to Carol Liebel, Executive Director of Ashe Cultural and Arts Center. To join us again on the stage. Also, Amy Koritz will be with us. She is at Drew University as a professor there. I believe Sean Mukhtar is also here. Yes, Sean. Yes, Sean. Dr. Sean Mukhtar. Page, leader, co-director, and newly minted PhD at the university. And last but not least, Carlton Turner, Executive Director of Ultimate. And I said last but not least, but I didn't mean that because Sylvia Gale is also joining us. Forgive me.
So we have put these challenging questions on the table and invite comment from whoever wishes to speak.
I'm happy to begin. I just want to give a little bit of context for what brings me to this place here. I am the co-director of the Engaged Undergraduate Education Research Group for Imagining America. One of Imagining America's organizing strategies has been to create these affinity groups around issues and challenges and opportunities within higher education that allows us to engage in deeper conversation. So the undergraduate research group has included 6 IA institutions. We were fortunate to receive funding from the Teagle Foundation to pursue projects on our individual campuses. We invite everybody to join and share in that conversation in 2 sessions that we have organized for this conference. And our strategy for addressing these questions is to look at where are the continuities and leverage points where we can engage with undergraduate education at our institutions in a way that really does embody IA's mission and also furthers the ends of education in the liberal arts, in the art, humanities, and design disciplines at the undergraduate level. And the strategy we developed for doing that, we're calling civic professionalism. That language comes from work done by Scott Peters, Bill Sullivan, and others connecting knowledge, practice, and values. We were particularly inspired by the work of Bill Sullivan. And I want to read just a brief quotation from an essay that we will be discussing in depth in our seminar on Saturday from Bill's work, and then I'll let others pick up on this. What seems particularly lacking in many institutions is serious effort to provide an integration of students' educational experiences with the orientation and resources necessary for the ethical application of knowledge as individuals, as workers, and as citizens and participants in civil society. So we envision civic professionalism as a way to name and further a response to that challenge.
So I guess I'll go next. I want to start by talking a little bit about the kinds of things that we do at Ashe. So it was alluded to earlier that we kind of started a hybrid university in the community program in partnership with College Unbound, Bush, and Northeastern University, ourselves, and Loyola University in New Orleans, particularly the Box Literacy Center and my colleague here, Patrice Samsabia. But we've had a history of working with universities in the city, and in terms of really supporting them and making the connection to community, being able to figure out how it is that you help students to understand how it is that you're supposed to enter a community, as well as being able to look at things that we needed to have done at the center where we needed some capacities that we didn't happen to have. So if I were to speak to the whole notion about the kinds of things that, need to change, if you find people who get it, then it's great. If you don't, then it's there's always this feeling of kind of being used in the process. And so if there were a way to essentially kind of change the expectation around things like publishing and research, so that if you did not also credit the people that you worked with in the research, that somehow you lost points for what you wanted to if I could give you something, that would be the kind of thing that I would look at. We sit with big libraries and computer labs and design labs, and often if you're not a student, you don't have access to those things unless you have someone who is willing to be disruptive on campus, to be able to build relationships along. And so if there were a way to essentially balance the resource investment that's done in universities with an expectation that has tax kind of relationship to it, so that those kind of things have to be done. So that there was a way to be able to incent people in a very serious way. Then I think those are the kinds of changes that I think that could make a huge difference in terms of how the exchange between the theory of what it is that folks learn in universities and the practice of living it on the ground, that equal value will be given on either side to both the folks who invested the time in learning in the academy, as well as folks who have the experience and also have invested the time in learning who are on the ground. And so I think if there were ways to essentially build these incentive practices, which could be, they could be nice incentives or not, but that, so that people were really moved to want to work more reciprocally and to work more generously in terms of being able to open the doors to the tower so that folks can manage to get in.
Carol, can I jump in? Because I want to resonate with that, and I want to amplify it in a different direction. I see a partial answer to that dilemma that you see from the community organization standpoint. I see it from my position at the University of Richmond in a Center for Civic Engagement. I'm sitting in this chair as a staff member with faculty status. Try that on. It's an awkward role, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Here's what I want to tell you a little story that connects that kind of role with the dilemma that you just made. There's a moment on our campus every fall, colloquy. I get a stomachache just thinking about it right now, because there's a moment when the provost and the new provost had an opportunity to change this ritual, but did not. At the end, it's supposed to be an inclusive gesture. Faculty are asked to stand, and we applaud all the faculty. and then faculty sit down, and staff are asked to stand, and we applaud all the staff. It's an intensely existential crisis for me every year, and for my colleagues in similar roles. Do I stand with the faculty and my staff allies across campus are confused because they see me as a peer and a colleague? If I stand with the staff, do my faculty colleagues think that I forget that I actually teach and undermine myself? Do I undermine myself in that moment? But let me demonstrate why that doesn't work. How many people in this room, raise your hand if you would identify yourself only as a faculty member? You don't direct something, you're not a program builder. So there's a little bit, right? Good. How many people would identify yourselves only as an administrator or a staff person? You're not also an educator. You're not also a lifelong activist. That's a hard role to step into. So I think that when we say be one or be the other within our campus culture, we actually erase the location we're most ripe for culture change, for sustaining the kind of reciprocal relationships that you need. It's the institutional intermediaries on our campuses who have the expertise, the capacity, actually the power to catalyze the kind of connection you're talking about, to educate people in ways that they need before becoming your partners, and yet we erase them. And so my invitation to us, and IA is beginning to do this. I'm here, I almost didn't get you, Tim, but you finally, you got me up on the stage, right? Now I'm joking, but I think that the fact that my kind of position is represented on this stage is a key move. We have to resist these deeply ingrained hierarchies because they undermine the kind of deeply collaborative work that we're engaged in.
I'd like to just build on what both of you just said from the position of someone who just came up in a graduate program. I've been talking to a lot of my colleagues, and obviously all of us are talking about job hunting and what we want to do next. And I think our collective experience has been that within the professional space of graduate education, we are still in a place of being kind of nostalgic for, you know, the traditional academic job. Certainly, the advising that we often get is based on that, right? So when I first came in 2008, it was the economic crisis was in full effect. However, within the graduate education space, you still were getting the, okay, how, even in race and ethnic studies, even in critical race and ethnic studies, it's keep your head down until you get tenure, right? Which is a nice idea, except that you're probably not going to get a tenure track job. And so it's like, oh, well, it's okay, you can hold out. And if it doesn't work out, you can always go be an administrator or get a hybrid position, right? There's this kind of, there's still this attachment. And I think it's not and I think it's purely an emotional attachment to this form of labor that has particular structure to it that most people today, as you demonstrated, don't experience. And so one of the things that I'd like to add to this is really building, using spaces like PAGE, but beyond that, really building capacity for civic professionalism within graduate education and bringing people up through that pipeline into the teaching world, into hybrid positions, into outside of the academy, and not seeing that as some sort of loss of effort or knowledge or preparation, right? That would be the thing that I would envision.
As we transition to Carlton, I just want to punctuate the research that Imagining America is doing on the aspirations and decisions of graduate students and early career scholars so that we can have a better understanding of what the needs are for our graduate programs and how we might infuse that kind of ethos of civic professionalism in the graduate programs.
Thank you. I'm the executive director of Alternate Roots. I am not an academic or a scholar, as most of you probably are in this room. Alternate Roots is a 38-year-old member service organization that is based in Atlanta, Georgia, and serves 16 southern states in the District of Columbia. We were founded by Highlander Center for Research and Education in 1976 by a number of theater companies that were really interested in understanding how to foster change with the shifting environments and the shifting cultural practices that were happening in the South, and to do that from a social justice and equity standpoint. And I've been with the organization now for a decade. So the first thing I did in thinking about these questions was I changed the name of the conference. So from, I think it was organizing culture and change with periods, I turned it into a sentence and said, thinking about IA's role, it should be trying to create a culture of organizing for change. And that's to me, is what the work is really about. And so I think about Ella Baker, was brought up, and what she said about finding where the work is happening in the community. So the first thing I thought about was acknowledging the places where learning and change is happening already in the field. And I think of places like Roadside Theater and Apple Shop and the Highlander Center and Alternate Roots and the Urban Bushwomen Institute and Free Southern Theater and other places where there's a lot of learning happening around cultural equity, around civic engagement, around community engagement, and around practices to really shift and transform community from the ground up. And finding ways to validate those systems, like the way that Ashe has, in building these relationships with the College Unbound program and developing ways to engage people where they are in the community and not expect them to come to you, which is part of the problem with higher ed, is that it's always about bringing people out of their community into this artificial community that doesn't really have a policy or basis in terms of challenging or changing policies in the community. It really is a space in which we're launching people into the status quo. And so thinking about that, and I'm happy to say that I'm a recent graduate of the College Unbound program. So thinking about, then the other thing I thought about was economy. And we know that there's 1.2 trillion and growing dollars in student debt. And so the economic design of higher education is meant to push bodies into the status quo. And so how do we shift these policies to think about making higher ed more accessible to all, but also reversing this trend that has made higher ed basically a place of entrapment for indentured servitude. So when you leave higher ed, you feel like you got to get that job that makes the money so you can pay that student loan. You know, you don't get a chance to take the knowledge and the understanding and the things that you've learned to actually implement them in the way that's best for your community and best for the future. You have to fall into whatever the lines is that are, you know, are going to pay the bills. And so that's a big, big challenge.
It's an abstract question to ask, part of what's up there, the second one, but we really do need to be thinking really well about what are the sources of power that we can build in this organization, that we can build it and use smartly. How do we think about that? What are the sources of power?
The people of the power. The people of the power in the moment that you find ways to tap into the people, resources, and assets within your community is when you're going to find out what the true strength of IA is. And that's what organizing is. It's tapping into the strength and the will of the people to see a change that needs to happen and to not stop until that change is made. And you know, part of organizing is also sacrifice. And it's not a word that is really embraced in higher ed or even in our society and community at large. And so understanding the sacrifices that the generations of the civil rights movement made in order for us to even be able to do this work side by side, And Atlanta, I think, is a good place to have that conversation with this deep, rich history in the civil rights movement, and understanding, you know, that the work that it was so important that people were willing to put their lives on the line. And so I think the question is like, what are you willing to sacrifice for? You know, what is that important to you in higher ed that you'll be willing to sacrifice for? And how important are these changes to the future of our country and our own livelihood and of humanity?
Just have to say quickly, I'm really excited that we are in many ways returning to the focus on the power of institutional leaders. And so I know that at least one university president, one college president is here, Brian Murphy, who's going to be leading a discussion with the President's Council to actually talk about how presidents can see the humanities, arts, and design as a way to help mitigate some of the fear that they're facing in these hellish positions, right, that have all these status hierarchy battles that they have to face, but also to create a space for them to nurture each other with respect to thinking about different models of engagement and how to leverage that power.
So I think it's very important. Most of us are working within institutions, and those institutions have power structures as part of them, which we ignore at our risk. I think it's very important that we have an analysis and an understanding of how power functions within our institutions as well as within the broader society. Otherwise, we cannot make good strategic decisions about how to use our energies. Right now, higher education is under enormous pressure because of the debt crisis, which is in some ways of its own making, but that's a different conversation. And therefore, the leadership, the power centers in higher education are responding to these external pressures in ways that we may not find amenable to our values and our goals. So figuring out what those responses are and how to intervene effectively in those responses, I think, is a key kind of work for us.
Sources of power, I named a huge source of power, and it was evident in this room. But Sean pointed to another. I mean, IA has this extremely vibrant network of engaged graduate students. And I think that what has defined IA's relationship to PAGE over the past decade, that's publicly active graduate education, is that it has not considered PAGE fellows to be younger, novice scholars approaching their engagement, because that is not accurate. These are innovators leading and pushing the boundaries of their education because they have no choice, because their commitments drive them to do it. And I say them, but that was me too. And so I think the sources of power are here. The question is how to amplify, nurture, sustain the networks.
How do we do that?
I think that we should look to PAGE because they are the most advanced constituent group in IA in terms of building alliances beyond the conference and sustaining themselves and each other and amplifying that conversation.
For every relationship that's worked, there have been efforts at relationships that haven't. And so I think with IA being really focused on this way of looking at higher education and community as a collaboration, becoming a broker for relationship building, being viewed as one of the places that you can contact and learn how to do that, or be put in touch with other people who are doing similar kinds of things. I think that that's a power, because I think that there are many people who are becoming aware that they have to be their own salvation, and they're grappling with how. Once you get people organized, then it becomes, knowledge does become power. How to get the resources, what are the things that have worked, have not worked, etc. And so I think the whole notion of making that like a visible part of who it is that, like the dating service, so to speak. You know, you're trying to figure out how to hook up with the university. Here's some coaching that we can offer. You have an area of interest. Here's some places that have done similar work. You can be in touch with them and that kind of thing.
So when I hear you, I'm thinking about what I think we're discovering is a huge source of power. And as has been mentioned, and as the provost from Emory talked about, we've been thinking and practicing and experimenting in narrative quite a bit. I think one of the huge sources of power is creating the work of creating a space for people to tell their story self. I've discovered this in my work of doing oral histories of faculty members, that they're very, very seldom asked to tell their story of how did you end up in higher education? Where did you grow up? What was that like? You know, what influenced and shaped your life? They're never asked that. It's a humanizing sort of move to invite people to tell that story of self, to connect it to the work. And in many cases, that uncovers this important thing in organizing is an agitating move, because there is a gap between their aspirations and what they're able to be achieving. And this links to one of the organizing practices we've been learning from, the one-to-one relational meeting, where people are discovering each other's story and learning whether they want to have a public relationship. So that's very powerful, and we see it. But the step of coming to the we, of weaving those individual stories of self into a larger we, is the place that I'm most interested in learning. How do we do that? How do we create a we in Imagine America across all of our member institutions? So there's a real sense that we are a we, and that we in this moment, in the story of now, have important, urgent work to do.
And if I may, there's also another, I guess, a flip side to the piece on narrative, which is that I often find organizations, individuals, groups, neighborhoods that we identify as community, the story is all they're ever asked to do, right? Tell me your story, tell me your story. It's like research fatigue. Sure. Tell me everything about yourself, like how many people are in this place, And so then in another way, there are many, many people who live this kind of imposed public life, because the even structures of social services require that they reveal everything, right? And so then there may be a desire within those communities to actually keep things private, right? Like, what's so great about public? Like, my entire life is public. And so, to me, all of these techniques and strategies we use, ultimately, it boils down to a sharing of power, which is always messy. I think many of us went to a lot of the Freedom Summer events that took place this last summer, and that, to me at least, was the most, the narrative that resonated the most was that community organizing is about relationship building. It's about, having conflict, but still being able to move forward with the work and not feeling like one has to have a united front, whatever that even means, in order to actually do the work of organizing.
I know that Sylvia had something to say, and so
I want to hear Carol's poem.
Yeah, okay.
I think it relates.
We're hearing Carol's propaganda. We'll use that as a springboard to expand the conversation. Carol, I'll invite our colleagues to lead the stage.
yearn for belonging. Soon, human touch defines our sense of intimacy, becoming a good exchange for our first sanctuary. Familiar, though not the same. It soothes and inspires us to begin our necessary launch to living. Holding fast at first, then tentative to our new shores of connection. We begin our dance, our cleaving to yet holding from those like us who are also seeking their own delicate balance to life. With every fiber of our spirit, we struggle to become able to be alone, yet part also of those who help us know our emerging selves. They mostly look like us, sound like us, and we become like them. We are so satisfied with this till the day that new presence shows up, and we start to feel the pull to be with this new discovered pleasure. Though different, we bask in it, we flirt with it. It makes us laugh, feel good, reluctant to leave. Call it neighbor, friend, teacher, or just community. Now, a needed part of happy. So, our lifelong collecting of others begins. More and more to choose from, to add to our anchoring, our tending of self and our expanded self called we. Yes, we sense the difference from those first ones, the ones we once needed so much, called family. Once taken for granted, now we fear the risk of losing either one or the other. So, we learn this ritual, this flirtatious dance of catching spirits, collecting people, adding them over and over to our being. And we grow better and better at this graceful effort. The new ones pull us, push, shape us, helping define us. This scares us, but also propels us, helping to anchor us, find our center, test our bonds of connection, belonging. We lose some along the way, yet we continue the dance, ever searching and collecting the ones for our we. Some leave, some stay, some melt into us, absent-minded, automatic, like for these. These, in the end, make our life more fulfilling, satisfying, and worth the living.
Disruption.
It can tear us apart or bring us together.
Last year, I learned that with enough student voices, you can change a whole department.
My president celebrates community engaged scholarship because it looks good in brochures.
Last year, I picked up the phone at the Humanities Center, and there was a materials engineer on the other end. And today, our engineering and our humanities students and faculty, they collaborate in the classroom and in the community. It's not easy to sustain this kind of work. It doesn't really fit in our Gen Ed criteria, but we're working together to change that too.
When we started the Humanities program for adults living in challenging circumstances, the Affordable Housing Agency was our best community partner. Little did we know that 5 years later, when My Research University withdrew funding, the agency would take over the program, seeing it as a critical offering to their clients, alongside financial literacy, paths to home ownership. Now they are taking a year-long humanities seminar.
I'm a Spanish professor. So a student told me, oh, service learning. What a great opportunity to practice my Spanish. But I said, no. The Spanish is a great opportunity for you to show and do a much better service learning.
This semester, I'm finishing up writing another play that I've written based on service learning in my writing courses with my students. And we know that when we write these plays and teach people how to tell their stories in these constructed environments, they do make better choices and they are empowered. And this is the work that the university enables me to do, and it's truly a privilege. But as a non-tenure earning faculty, frankly, it doesn't pay enough. Sometimes I don't know if I can pay my bills. And moreover, this type of community engaged scholarship at my university is not going to get me the respect and security that tenure would afford. It makes me wonder, how can I really succeed in the university?
I went back to school when I was 31 years old, and I had been an actor and a waiter and a garbage man and a coffee barista for those 31 years. And I went back to school because I wanted to figure out how to do something meaningful in the world with my art. And as a graduate student, I was in a theater ed program at NYU, and I was able to merge my scholarship and my day-to-day life with the work that I was interested in doing in communities. And it was very gratifying. And I was hired by Imagining America as the associate director, ostensibly because of my street cred, because I had a long experience in community. And so when my job as a staff member required me to be at a desk for 40 hours a week, and have a 9-to-5 job for the first time in my life at age 37, I was truly the cliched middle-aged man looking up at the ceiling at night saying, how did the decisions that I thought were successful, bringing me the right way, lead me to this place with 2 kids and hedges and an office job? And I was desperate. Syracuse, that first winter I was there, literally got 15 feet of snow. And I was drinking way too many IPAs and coming back home. Well, no, I came back home and then I drank the IPAs. Jan, just so you know, I was not drinking IPAs in the office. And I came in one winter morning, I said, Jan, I'm really desperate. I cannot afford, pardon me. This happens every conference, newbies, I cry at some point. Today is the opening plenary. I said, Jan, I can't afford to lose my job. I'm the only one with insurance. I need this job, but I might have to lose this job because my soul is dying. And I said, my job every day is to support faculty members to be able to do the work that they were trained to do. And yet a staff member in this organization is required to sit at this desk for 40 hours a week. And if I can't figure out how to be an artist again as a staff member, I have to go. And Jan said, let me think about it. And the next day she came in and she said, rewrite your job description about how you want to do it. And there is a direct line between that statement and many things, but certainly the fact that I'm wearing a mask right now in the opening plenary.
Inspired, my students disrupted the syllabus, seized control of the class, and created 2 weeks worth of amazing student-led activities.
Wait, where am I? I thought we're supposed to be in an academic conference.
It can tear us apart or bring us together. Ben, can I have some lights? First of all, I want to thank the 8 people who joined me in this experiment. We got together yesterday, and from about 1 o'clock till 4 o'clock, we made that thing up. But it was based on the organizing institute that we started in June. Now, we had hoped to now, of course, surprise, surprise, we're all scheduled first plenary session of the day. We had really hoped to engage your stories. Do you have a logistics question or?
A logistics question?
Or
I mean, kind of not really. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to disrupt the disruption.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Ben. I'm Ben Fink. This is my first time here. And, you know, it's just incredibly impressive to hear all of these stories about all of these things that are... Give me a mic. Test. Thanks.
He's got it.
Hey. So, thank you for legitimizing me like this. You know, I'm coming into this, and I got a kind of a different story, which is I just finished my PhD at the University of Minnesota. Some of you guys have read my work, which I'm really honored by. Thank you. And my story is a lot of attempts and failure to create that kind of public work and community within higher ed that's gotten me, at least in part, to leave higher education. I'm working now in the nonprofit world, and honestly, why I'm here is because I want to be proven wrong about higher education and its possibilities and potential. So I guess I'm just curious if I'm the only one in that room, or if there's other people here with stories like me or other kind of stories that, yeah?
We're going to start the next session at 11, so if people want to talk, pee when you need to pee, and we'll just keep going. This person right here.
Wait, you're good. You got a thing right here, yeah? You're with me?
Well, does anybody else want to say?
There's a couple of people.
We'll have it coming out. I'm the director of the Masters of Arts and Social Change degree program. I'm a staff member with a PhD, and the faculty council at my institution just voted that only tenure-line ranked faculty can direct degree programs, and I'm the only one affected by that decision.
Oh.
I really liked the dance, and partly for its strong examples of change. So I want to bring in when I was a college-age student, I worked for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, for the Dorothy Cotton, the Citizenship Education Program. After Martin Luther King practice, I have a dream. My dad was on the executive council. So I want to say that SCLC's perspective needs to be brought into this, and I don't think it's strong enough. So SCLC was framed strategically by Bayard Rustin's brilliant strategy, marching throughout, that the movement needed to win over the middle America. Not simply people who were with the movement. Actually, the March on Washington was framed in terms of winning over most Americans who didn't have strong opinions about the Civil Rights Movement. I think that's true for our movement. We need to think about narratives, examples, positive stories like the one that's going to be the president's session. Fleeting and Dudley talking about a regional economic transformation. We need to talk, as King was brilliant at doing, and talk about the great narratives of our institutions that have been shrunk and lost, but that can appeal to people. The City College, the Wiley College, and the Great Debaters Movement, the vision of the genius of American higher education at its best, which was a kind of cooperative excellence, not an individualist excellence. That we can do better if we work together across differences. We need to recognize that, and he was right, the power structures in our institutions are also full of people who feel trapped and desperate and can be allies. So that was SCLC's perspective, that we need to build a majoritarian movement to make change. There was a kind of complement to SNCC that was both were necessary, but the SCLC perspective has to be part of this discussion.
Thanks, man. I know you're my brother, but you call me neoliberal capitalist.
Brother, if you personalize that, that's on you, man. I would talk to you.
So, I know that. I'm a communist, so I know that's what he does. Okay, so you disrupted me. You threw me off balance. But that's all I hear in academia. People just walk around disrupting. Where is the bridge that now gets me back into my balance, into imagining America? Talk to me about that bridge.
In the spirit of the bridge and in the spirit of Harry's reaching out to the majority, I sometimes feel like I always have this role. I want to remind us, because I think there are only a few persons in the room who come from the community colleges, and half of America's undergraduates are in the community colleges. So among the bridges I beg you to build are the bridges between the students in our institutions and the research and private and public universities, between the graduate students and the teachers. And I beg all of you who are graduate students to entertain the alien concept of teaching where the majority of the students are.
Yeah, hi.
Okay, hi. What you said and also the bridge building, one of the questions that the Page Fellows is trying to work with is this term public scholarship is something that we throw around a lot. But is the scholarship piece of that possible if you leave academia? So that's something that we're going to be talking about in one of our sessions from 2:30 to 4. And we would love anyone and everyone that wants to join that conversation to please show up and share your expertise and knowledge on that piece as part of the bridge building.
Okay, I have to wrest control back. I have to take it back. I can speak for the staff, I know that we are gratified that people disrupted the disruption. I wish we had more time that we could hear it, but that is now your job at this conference, to continue to disrupt what this is supposed to be and say the things that you are not saying elsewhere and challenge people as Fluny is challenging this consortium in whatever ways we need to be challenged. We hope that this playful performance, you got to say something, Fiona? You must.
Public, the journal Public, one of the places in which this conversation can take place. And one of the spaces in which we can have these debates and dialogue and discussion, you can share the kind of products and conversations in your work, is the Public, the Journal of Imagining America. And Janko and Cruz is
All right, so we now have a 20-minute break during which we mostly have to get out of here because they're going to close the doors, so we have 4 separate spaces. Thank you all very much for the plenary session.